I still remember the day everything changed. The day my world opened like a door I had been afraid to touch for years. It was a quiet morning. The kind that feels gentle on the heart, yet carries a strange weight of expectation that you can't quite name. The sunlight spilled softly through the curtains, cutting warm, golden stripes across the living room floor. Dust floated in those beams, suspended in the air, like tiny particles of magic I had never noticed before. The house felt peaceful, still, almost as still, if I'm honest. There was a silence that made me uneasy, the kind that presses on your chest and asks questions you aren't ready to answer. I had lived most of my life, carrying a strange emptiness that I could never fully explain. It wasn't always loud, it didn't scream for attention. It was a small, persistent ache, tucked away in the corners of my chest like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. I had grown used to it, learned to live around it, to distract myself, with routines and responsibilities, with small joys and fleeting laughter. But it had never truly gone. Sometimes, late at night, I would feel it stir. A reminder that some truth was missing. I tried to ignore it. The way you learn to ignore a recurring pain that seems inconsequential at first but never quite disappears. You tell yourself, it's nothing. You bury it beneath tasks, habits, and the chatter of daily life. And for years, that strategy had worked almost, until that morning. And then, it happened. A single sentence. A quiet voice. A moment I will never forget. My sister called and said, "Please come over. It's time you knew the truth." 10 simple words. No explanation. No preamble. No warning beyond the urgency in her tone. I remember how the room felt suddenly smaller. The walls seemed to close in, listening intently, pressing against me with an invisible weight. Even the air felt different, denser, heavier, as if it held the gravity of what was about to be revealed. I gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white, whispering to myself, "What truth?" But she didn't answer. She only repeated, "Just come." For a long moment, I stayed frozen, my eyes tracing the familiar view outside the window. People walked past my house, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if the universe hadn't shifted beneath my feet. Children chased one another on the sidewalk, their laughter light and carefree, oblivious to the tremor running through my chest. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A bicycle passed. Life continued around me, ordinary and uninterrupted, while inside, everything I had taken for granted trembled. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself. Maybe she just wants to talk. Perhaps she has discovered some small piece of news, some minor concern that she feels I should know about. But deep inside, a whisper of certainty stirred, knowing that this was different. This was not casual. This was not trivial. Something significant, something irreversible, awaited me, and my mind recoiled even as it braced itself. I remember standing slowly, my body stiff, my hands trembling. Each movement felt weighted, deliberate. My shoes felt foreign on my feet, heavy, cumbersome, as though they knew they were carrying me toward a moment from which I could not turn back. I exhaled a long, shaky breath, trying to anchor myself, to remind my body that it could survive this, even if my heart could not yet imagine it. The sky was cloudy that morning, a soft gray that promised rain but had not yet delivered. A gentle wind stirred the branches of the trees lining the street, moving the leaves in small, whispering gestures, as if nature itself were trying to comfort me, preparing me for what lay ahead. The scent of wet earth lingered faintly in the air, the faint tang of life and decay intertwined. I noticed it without thinking, an automatic observation, a grounding mechanism. Each step I took down the street felt heavier than the last. Pavement beneath my shoes, the uneven rhythm of the cracks and stones, the occasional scattering of leaves. I felt everything more acutely than usual. It was as if my body had become a vessel tuned to notice every sensation, every small detail, so that I could brace for the unknown that waited at the end of the walk. I didn't know what I feared more, hearing the truth, or witnessing everything I thought I knew unravel before my eyes. My mind raced in fragmented flashes, the faces of people I loved, moments I cherished, secrets I had held tightly. Could everything I believed be false? Could all the foundations of my life, relationships, memories, identity be nothing more than illusions? I walked past the bakery where I had once bought bread for my family, past the little grocery store with its familiar hum of conversation and clinking glass jars, past the corner where I had once watched children play. Every familiar landmark felt foreign, Each one seemed to mock my fear and anticipation with its mundane normalcy, reminding me that the world would not pause for my revelation. Life would continue, indifferent, regardless of the storms that roared within me. I slowed my pace unconsciously, noticing the soft flutter of pigeons taking off from the rooftops, the careful way a woman balanced her shopping bags, the distant chime of a bell somewhere down the street. The ordinary details grounded me, held me steady, even as my chest constricted with anticipation. I wondered if my sister's words were about something that would change me forever, or simply confirm something I had always suspected, but never dared to articulate. My mind wandered, recalling snippets of my past, moments of joy, of fear, of small betrayal, and lingering uncertainty. I remembered afternoons spent sitting by this very window, imagining what the future might hold, dreaming of stability and warmth. And now, that imagined future seemed fragile, suspended on the edge of something that I could not yet name. By the time I reached the small park near her house, my hands were clammy, my heart racing. I paused, looking at the trees swaying gently in the wind, their branches like arms reaching for me, offering quiet solace. I thought of all the mornings I had spent here, watching sunlight filter through the leaves, and how different this moment felt, how charged with expectation, with tension, with impending change. I wondered if I had braced myself enough. I wondered if there was ever a way to truly prepare for the kind of truth that could shift the ground beneath your life in a single breath. And yet, despite every hesitation, every trembling thought, I took another step forward, because there is no turning back from a moment meant to arrive. It comes, insistently, whether we are ready or not. I approached her house slowly, noticing the familiar scent of jasmine from her garden, the gentle creak of the gate as I opened it. Each small sound seemed amplified, a prelude to the revelation I would soon face. My heart thudded in my chest like a drum, each beat echoing the question I could not yet answer. Could I survive what I was about to learn? Could I bear the weight of truth finally uncovered? The door opened before I could knock. She was there, standing in the doorway with a calm that felt almost unnatural against the storm of anxiety churning inside me. I could see the lines of concern etched lightly on her face, the hesitation in her stance, the quiet gravity in her eyes, and in that instant, the entire weight of the morning, the anticipation, the fear, the trembling footsteps, condensed into a single, unbearable awareness. By the end of that day, nothing would ever be the same again. I inhaled, feeling the cool, morning air mix with the warmth of rising sun on my skin, and stepped inside. And in that single, fragile moment, I understood something that would remain with me forever, that life, for all its beauty and ordinariness, has the power to shift beneath us in ways we cannot predict, and that the truth, once spoken, changes everything. I grew up in a small house that always felt full, not crowded in the usual sense, but alive in a way that made every corner seem to hold sound, warmth, and movement. Morning sunlight fell through the curtains, painting long, golden stripes across the worn wooden floors. The aroma of spices from the kitchen would drift through the rooms, mixing with the earthy scent of wet soil from the garden outside. Someone was always talking, laughing, chopping vegetables, sweeping the floor, or moving around, and yet, beneath the constant hum of activity, there was a quiet that only I seemed to notice as subtle tension. A silence threaded between the clatter, a space that felt slightly empty even in the middle of noise. To anyone visiting, we seemed like a perfectly ordinary family. My father, a man of few words, carried himself with a quiet dignity. My mother moved about the house with calm efficiency, folding clothes with care, stirring pots with soft concentration, tending to small domestic rituals as if they were the most important things in the world. And my sister Amina always seemed like a sunbeam, casting warmth and steadiness in every room she entered. Together, they formed a picture that looked complete, harmonious, full. But I remember, even as a very young child, feeling like there was a piece of the picture missing, something invisible, quietly slipping through my fingers whenever I reached for it. Amina was my safe place. She had an almost instinctive way of noticing when I was uneasy, and her hands were always there to steady me. When I woke from a nightmare, she would brush my hair, hold my hand, and whisper, "It's okay. You're safe now." Even as I grew older, she remained a constant presence, a quiet guardian who made the world feel less frightening. Her laughter was soft, but it had the power to fill a room with warmth, and her smile carried a kind of reassurance I could never fully explain. She never dismissed my fears, never told me I was overreacting, never asked me to hurry past the quiet ache in my chest. She simply held space for me, and that, more than anything else, made me believe I belonged. My mother's love was quieter, more subtle. It showed itself in small gestures that often went unnoticed by others. The way she would fold my clothes so neatly that they seemed to hold a softness all their own. The way she would warm my forehead with the back of her hand when I felt sick. The care she put into preparing meals that smelled like home even before you tasted them. She never said, "I love you" out loud very often, but her love was present in every careful motion, every thoughtful act, and somehow, in that quiet, understated way, I never doubted it. I never questioned whether I mattered to her, even when the house was loud, chaotic, or tense. My father, though, was different. Not unkind, just distant. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and often seemed to carry a weight that separated him from the rest of the world. Even when he was in the same room, there was a softness in his eyes when he looked at me, a sadness that seemed too deep for words, and a searching quality that suggested he held a secret I was not meant to know, at least not yet. Sometimes I would catch him staring into the distance, and I would imagine he was looking at some invisible memory or thought, somewhere far from our small, bustling home. There were moments when I wanted to step closer, to reach into that quiet sadness and touch whatever it was that haunted him, but something always held me back, a mixture of fear and instinctive respect. The house itself seemed to reflect this complex balance of presence and absence. The wooden floors creaked underfoot in familiar patterns. The windows let in streams of light that would shift as the day passed. The walls, painted in muted creams and yellows, held years of family laughter and conversation. But there were corners where silence lingered like a soft shadow. Sometimes I would sit in the living room, listening to the distant laughter of neighbors through the thin walls, and feel a subtle hollowness inside me, as if the house itself had a secret it could not share. There were small hints, subtle and fleeting, that I didn't fully understand at the time. Neighbors whispering outside our gate when I walked by, glances exchanged quickly and broken off when I approached, relatives going silent or lowering their voices whenever I entered a room, little comments dropped here and there, which, at the time, I brushed off as coincidence or imagination, but which over the years accumulated into a pattern I could not ignore. Sometimes, I felt fully loved and embraced by my family, yet simultaneously separate, like a guest in my own home, a home that should have been mine in every sense, but that occasionally felt slightly foreign. Whenever confusion overwhelmed me, whenever the quiet ache in my chest became too much to ignore, I would turn to Amina. She was patient and unwavering. "Don't overthink," she would say, tucking my hair behind my ear or squeezing my hand gently. "You're loved." And because she said it with such certainty, I believed her. I clung to her words like a lifeline, repeating them silently to myself when the house felt too big, too loud, or too empty. Even so, the ache never fully went away. It lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder that a piece of my story was missing, a question that had yet to be asked. I did not know what it was, only that it existed, a subtle emptiness, threaded into the fabric of my childhood, that made me feel as though I were standing at the edge of a world I could see, but never fully enter. Life carried on, as it always does, carrying me forward through childhood and adolescence with the rhythms of school, chores, and small celebrations. I played with friends, learned my lessons, and laughed when the house felt light with joy. But the question remained, quietly pressing in the corners of my mind. Why did some things feel incomplete? Why did some moments feel like they were only half? I would catch glimpses of answers in small details: my father's lingering gaze, the careful way my mother folded my sister's clothes, the fleeting silence that fell when certain relatives visited, but I did not have the courage, nor the clarity, to confront them fully. Then, when I was around 20, the missing piece appeared in a form I could not ignore. I was tidying a closet, looking for old books and photographs, when I came across my parents' wedding album. Its cover was faded, the edges worn soft from years of handling. I opened it carefully, as though it contained something sacred, and I was not disappointed. The first photograph showed my mother holding a baby Amina. Her smile was radiant, warm, and full of love. My father stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, smiling faintly but with a softness in his eyes that I had never fully appreciated before. I stared at that photograph for what felt like hours. The sepia tones seemed to hold a world of memory, a life before I had ever arrived. And then, a single question rose in my mind, simple and devastating. Where was I? I asked my mother, trying to keep my voice calm. Where was I? I waited for her to meet my eyes. She didn't. She simply said, softly, "You were with your aunt." There was a pause, a subtle tremor in her hands as she spoke, but she said no more. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to know why, how, when, but fear held me back. The fear of the answer, the fear of the truth I was not ready to face. Perhaps a part of me already knew, and perhaps I wasn't ready to acknowledge it fully, so life continued. I carried the quiet, unanswered feeling inside me like a small, persistent weight. I learned to live with it, weaving it into the tapestry of my daily life without ever letting it define me completely. I smiled, I laughed, I worked, I loved, I cherished Amina, my mother, my father, and the home I had always known, but the quiet ache remained, a subtle hum beneath everything else, a reminder that some stories are incomplete, that some truths are hidden, and that sometimes living with the questions is itself a form of endurance. And in that quiet endurance, I began to notice things I had never truly seen before: the softness of my mother's hands, the gentleness in my father's rare smile, the warmth of Amina's presence. I began to understand that love is not always spoken in words. Sometimes it is lived quietly, in small gestures, in fleeting moments of attention and care. And I realized that perhaps my place in the world, though veiled and mysterious, was still mine to hold. As the years went on, the small doubts that had once whispered quietly in my heart began to grow louder, accumulating into an almost constant hum of unease. At first, I tried to silence them, convincing myself that they were figments of imagination, remnants of overactive curiosity, or perhaps the misread anxieties of youth. I told myself that every family carries secrets, that life's mysteries do not always demand resolution, that some questions are better left unasked. Yet the feeling refused to dissipate. Like persistent water wearing away stone, those quiet doubts gnawed at the edges of my mind. Every overlooked glance, every hushed tone, every sudden pause began to carry weight, pressing down on me, demanding acknowledgement. I remember the first time this weight truly crystallized, the moment when the familiar rhythms of my life first fractured under the quiet power of suspicion. It was during a family wedding. The house was alive, a living, breathing organism of sound and light. Music twined through every corridor, carried by voices laughing and singing together. The walls were draped in strings of tiny lights that flickered like captured stars, dancing across polished floors. The air carried the mingled perfume of incense, fresh blossoms, and the rich aroma of simmering dishes, a tapestry of scents that should have been comforting. Children ran barefoot across the halls, their laughter like chiming bells that resonated through the rooms, a soundtrack of innocence and joy. Adults moved with measured care, balancing trays of sweets and cups of tea, their smiles warm, their greetings polished and sincere. It should have been a day of pure joy, a simple celebration. And yet, the moment that altered everything arrived softly, without fanfare, like a small crack in glass that would eventually split the entire window. An elderly relative, someone whose face I had long associated with kindness, pulled me aside in a narrow corridor. Her hand brushed lightly against my arm, her eyes narrowing as though weighing the very shape of my life. Searching for something she could not yet speak aloud, she leaned closer, her voice a whisper, careful yet urgent. "Do you ever meet your real mother?" I froze, my breath caught in my chest. The words lingered, hanging heavily like a storm cloud poised to break. Suddenly, the room's warmth, the music, the laughter, the flickering lights all faded to a muted gray, a soft, chilling background to the storm that had erupted inside me. My heart thundered violently against my ribs. My hands, which had been steady a moment before, turned clammy. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice fragile, cracking under the weight of disbelief and confusion. Before she could answer, she straightened, her expression carefully neutral, her body retreating, as though she had just breached a boundary she had long feared crossing. She muttered something vague about a mistake, her words floating away into the distance, leaving me standing alone, trembling, feeling as though a hidden door had quietly opened behind me, a door whose existence I had never suspected. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that her words were a fluke, a slip of the tongue, the errant echo of a mind confused by age. But the question, once planted, refused to be ignored. It clung to me, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts, like a shadow stretching across the corners of a room I thought I knew intimately. That night, when the celebration had ended and the house emptied, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the darkened room. The laughter and music of earlier felt unreal, disjointed from the life I thought I knew. I couldn't silence the refrain that looped endlessly in my mind. If she spoke that truth, is it something I was never meant to know? Not long after, another moment deepened the sense of disquiet. I was walking past the hallway outside my parents' bedroom when I overheard voices soft, urgent, careful. My steps faltered instinctively, curiosity pulling me closer despite the instinct to stay away. I think we should tell her, my father's voice said, low and hesitant, almost trembling with the weight of his own emotions. She's old enough now. She deserves to know. I pressed myself against the wall, breath held. My heart beat a hammer in my chest. My mother's reply was quieter, almost a plea. Not now, please. Not now. Those words settled on me like fog, dense and impenetrable. I felt the weight pressing into my chest, constricting my breath, clawing at the edges of my understanding. That night, everything changed in subtle ways. The quiet exchanges, the small glances, the hesitant touches of my parents, they all carried an unspoken weight. My father's smiles now seemed measured, cautious. My mother's gentle hands, once purely comforting, now trembled slightly with worry, perhaps guilt. Even the warmth of their love seemed burdened with an unspoken tension. A fragile thread stretched taut by a secret they could not yet reveal. I tried for a time to continue with my life as if nothing had shifted. I went to school, I spent time with friends, I attended family gatherings, I laughed, I participated, but the weight of uncertainty followed me relentlessly. I began noticing the small, subtle signs. Neighbors staring a moment too long, relatives' conversations pausing abruptly when I entered, the almost imperceptible hesitation in my father's eyes whenever he looked at me. My once familiar world began to warp slightly, constantly reminding me that something fundamental was missing, that my understanding of my own life was incomplete. One evening, seeking solace in the one person who had always been a steadfast anchor, I turned to Amina. We sat together on the porch, watching the sunset streak the sky in shades of pink and orange, the cicadas singing softly, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. I reached for her hand. Is there something I should know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She held my hand with the gentle steadiness I had always relied upon, her eyes soft but shadowed with a sadness I could not fully comprehend. Some things are better left in the past, she said. Her words were a quiet command for patience, a signal that the truth was not yet mine to claim. I wanted to press, to demand, to uncover the hidden threads that had so long eluded me. But something in her tone told me it wasn't yet time, so I stayed silent. Her warmth and calm, a temporary anchor, even as the questions within me writhed and multiplied. Time moved inexorably forward, as it always does, yet the shadow of uncertainty pressed ever more heavily. A year later, the quiet rhythm of our home changed when my father fell ill. At first, his symptoms were subtle: fatigue, a persistent cough, minor pains easily dismissed as ordinary. But gradually, his condition worsened, and our home's rhythm shifted, consumed by care and worry. I spent nights beside his bed, assisting him, adjusting his pillows, offering water, watching each subtle twitch of his hand, each tremor, each breath that came with labored effort. And with each passing day, I felt the weight of unspoken words pressing more heavily, pressing through the walls that had separated us from the truth. One night, as he rested and held my hand weakly, he whispered, "You deserved the truth." His words struck me deeply, a dagger tempered with sorrow. My chest tightened. "What truth?" I asked, though already knowing the answer. He closed his eyes, leaving only the sound of his shallow breathing, the room falling into stillness. I understood then, some truths would not be given, not yet, and perhaps not ever. When he passed, the void left behind was heavier than I had anticipated. Answers that had hovered just beyond my grasp vanished with him, leaving questions to swirl endlessly in my mind. At his funeral, I observed the faces of relatives, some sorrowful, some hesitant, some tinged with unspoken knowledge. When I asked for guidance, the answer was always the same: "It's not my place to tell you." And in their avoidance, the weight of omission became nearly unbearable. I tried to resume life, to participate in its rhythms, but the questions remained, haunting, persistent, inescapable. They followed me like shadows that lengthened at dusk, stretching behind every smile, every gesture, every ordinary moment. The truth became a presence itself, a living weight pressing against my chest, reminding me that there was a story I had not yet been allowed to hold. Then, one morning, it arrived. Amina called. Her voice, steady but thick with unspoken gravity, carried weight I could feel even through the receiver. "Come over," she said softly. "It's time you knew the truth." I sat frozen, the receiver pressing against my ear, heart hammering violently. My stomach churned, my chest tightened, and the familiar world tilted on its axis. The air around me thickened, almost suffocating, as if reality had become heavier, denser, filled with the pull of inevitability. The clock ticked loudly in the background. Outside, the faint chirping of birds, the distant hum of traffic, and the rustle of leaves all felt unreal, muted beneath the tidal wave of expectations swelling in my chest. And in that moment, I understood with clarity. I did not yet know the truth. I did not know its form, its details, or its consequences. I did not know how it would reshape my sense of self, my relationships, my understanding of love and family. And yet I knew, deep in my marrow, that the life I had known, the story I had carried with confidence, was about to fracture and reform. The shadow I had carried for decades, the quiet ache, the gnawing questions, the sense of missing pieces was about to meet the light. It was a moment of fear and anticipation intertwined, a mixture of loss and hope, of endings and beginnings colliding, and I realized, finally, that my life, the real story of my life, was only beginning to unfold in ways I had never imagined. The sky had been threatening. Rain, all morning, the clouds thick and gray, moving slowly, like they were reluctant to release the storm. As I walked toward Amina's house, I couldn't stop noticing how heavy the air felt, how every gust of wind seemed to press against my chest. My heart was pounding, though not from the walk I had taken this route countless times before. This time, each step felt like carrying an invisible weight, each breath a reminder of the questions I had carried for years, the questions that were finally about to meet answers. When I reached the house, the door opened before I could even knock. Amina stood there, framed by the dim light behind her, her face lined with exhaustion I had never seen before. It wasn't just fatigue from age or work, it was the fatigue of holding something heavy, something she had carried in silence for far too long. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, I felt the gravity of the moment, the tension that had been building for years finally settling around us like the air before a storm. The living room was quiet, dimly lit by a single lamp. The curtains were partially drawn, and the soft hum of a fan filled the space between us. It was ordinary and familiar, and yet that familiarity did nothing to soothe me. I sat across from her, my hands folded tightly in my lap, feeling them shake slightly, despite my attempt to remain calm. A few seconds passed in silence, though it felt like minutes before she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, deliberate, and yet there was a sharpness in it that cut through everything I had believed about my life. "You're not our parents' child." For a moment, my body froze. My mind struggled to catch up to the words. I felt myself detach from the room, as if my body were suddenly separate from itself, floating somewhere above the sofa, watching Amina's lips move without really hearing them. The words repeated themselves in my mind. Not our parents' child. Each word weighed heavier than the last, pressing against my chest until I thought I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, cracking under the weight of disbelief. Amina took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly, deliberately. "You were adopted," she said, quietly. "Only a few people knew." The room blurred, the hum of the fan, the muted color of the walls, the small stack of magazines on the table, they all faded into a haze. Memories I had tucked away, memories I had never understood, suddenly collided in my mind. The whispers of neighbors outside our gate, the looks that relatives gave me when I entered a room, the subtle hesitation in my parents' eyes during introductions. Everything, every fragment of confusion from my childhood suddenly made sense. Why didn't they ever tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling. A lump rose in my throat, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "They wanted to," Amina said softly, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But they were afraid of hurting you, afraid that the truth might break something fragile in your heart. They never wanted to deceive you, not in that way." I felt no anger. I felt no rage. There was a deep, heavy ache, like losing a version of life I had believed was mine, a life that suddenly seemed like someone else's story. My chest tightened, my thoughts scattered, and I found myself taking slow, uneven breaths. Amina reached across and took my hand. Her touch was steady and warm, grounding me when the world seemed to be slipping beneath my feet. "You are my sister," she whispered. "That will never change." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight of permanence that settled into my heart. The tremor of uncertainty that had haunted me for decades felt, for a brief moment, softened by her unwavering presence. And yet, The ache of loss lingered, a quiet mourning for the past I thought I had, for the certainty I had once known, for the innocence that had been taken without my knowledge. Amina began to speak slowly, carefully, as if she were threading words with great caution, afraid that one wrong phrase might shatter me completely. She explained the story I had never known. My biological mother was very young, alone, and without support. She had made a decision that no one should ever have to make, lightly, the decision to give me away. My adoptive parents had taken me in immediately, with open hearts, with a love that was real and tangible from the first day. The secret had not been kept from malice, she explained, but from fear that the truth might alter the delicate bonds that had already formed, fear that I might feel abandoned, fear that my world would fracture. I listened, barely able to breathe. Each word was a stone in my chest, heavy and unmovable. I tried to picture the faces I had loved my whole life, the parents who had nurtured me, who had tucked me in at night, who had laughed at my jokes, who had scolded me and guided me, how they had carried this secret so carefully, with such a fragile, deliberate grace. And yet, the knowledge did not diminish the love I felt for them. If anything, it made it more complex, more layered, more human. Is she alive? I asked, my voice a whisper that barely rose above the fan. Amina nodded. Yes, she is alive. Her eyes flicked briefly to mine, searching, gauging my reaction. Then she placed an envelope in my hand. The paper was thick, heavier than it looked. This is her address, she said softly. She asked about you many times. She never forgot you. I held the envelope as if it were a fragile thing, afraid that the slightest movement might tear it open. And yet, the weight of it was more than paper. It was the weight of decades I had never known, of questions finally answered, of a past that was suddenly alive and present. My hands trembled as I clutched it, feeling the pulse of history, of family, of choices made in love and fear. I sat there in silence, the hum of the fan filling the room, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind spinning with images and memories that suddenly had new meaning. I remembered the small, inexplicable moments from my childhood, the whispered conversations I had never understood, the sudden silences, the fleeting looks of worry or hesitation in my parents' eyes. All of it fit together now. A puzzle I had carried for decades without realizing it. Tears slid down my cheeks, unbidden, as I let the reality wash over me. It was grief, but not grief for something lost. It was grief for the innocence that had been taken from me, for the certainty I had believed in, for the life I had assumed was my own. And yet, beneath that grief was a strange, tender relief. The truth was finally out. The questions, the shadows, the quiet ache that had been with me since childhood, finally, it had an answer. Amina squeezed my hand, bringing me back from the swirl of memories. I know it's a lot, she said softly, and I know it changes everything. But you are still loved. You are still my sister. And your life has always been full of love. The people who raised you, the family you grew up with, they never stopped loving you for a single day. I nodded, though I barely had words. My mind felt crowded, my heart heavy, yet something inside me, small and fragile, began to stir. The sense of being untethered, of being adrift in a world of secrets, began to settle. I realized that life would never be the same, but perhaps that was not a bad thing. Perhaps the truth, though painful, could also be freeing. We sat there for what felt like hours, holding hands, saying nothing. The sky outside darkened further, and the first drops of rain tapped softly against the window. Each droplet seemed like a gentle punctuation, a quiet acknowledgement that life had shifted, that a new chapter had begun. Amina told me more about my biological mother, her struggles, her youth, her loneliness, the moments when she had wondered if she would ever see me. Each story was layered with both sorrow and love, a tapestry of choices made with the best intentions possible, given impossible circumstances. And then, she told me something I would never forget. You were meant to be loved, and in the lives you've lived, in the family that raised you, you were loved, always. That is never lost, no matter where the truth leads you now. I clutched the envelope again, feeling the pulse of possibility, the strange weight of both past and future. The world seemed quieter now, though it was still spinning. Everything I thought I knew had shifted, and yet, for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of fragile, trembling hope that perhaps the story of my life was only beginning to unfold in ways I could never have imagined. That was the day everything changed, the day the truth stepped out of the shadows. The day I began to understand that love is more than biology, more than secrets, more than the past we inherit. Love is also the courage to face the unknown, to carry both grief and hope, to open your hands and your heart to the life you never knew was waiting for you. And I realized, finally, that my story, my real story, was only beginning. For the first several days after discovering the truth, I felt as though I were moving underwater. The world around me seemed to exist in a different density, as if every sound, every movement, every color was filtered through a thick, invisible current. Air itself seemed heavier, each breath slightly more laborious than before. The familiar rhythm of life, the sounds of my family moving through the house, the chatter of neighbors outside, the soft hum of everyday activity was muted, distant, and dreamlike, as if I were watching the world from behind glass. Even the simplest acts felt unfamiliar, disconnected from my sense of self. I went through the motions, cooking meals, folding laundry, answering phone calls, replying to messages, but each action seemed mediated, separated from me by some intangible barrier. When I stirred rice in a pot, it felt like watching another person's hands move. The sound of water running through the sink echoed oddly, as if delayed, vibrating through some unseen medium. Folding clothes, a task I had performed countless times, became strange and deliberate, as if I were learning the motion for the first time. Even sitting on the couch, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, felt distant, almost like a recording playing in a room I no longer fully inhabited. And yet, the world felt sharper in other ways. Things I had never truly noticed before suddenly demanded attention. The pattern of sunlight shifting through the kitchen curtains became almost mesmerizing, each ray painting golden lines across the floor. I noticed the hum of the refrigerator, steady and low, and the subtle creaks of the house as it settled into itself. The morning calls of birds outside the window were distinct and delicate, each chirp punctuating the strange, suspended rhythm I was trapped in. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light seemed amplified, yet simultaneously irrelevant, as if I were noticing the details of a painting while being denied access to its story. The weight of memory pressed in on me during these days. Childhood memories, long tucked away and partially forgotten, resurfaced with startling clarity. My father's distant eyes, the way he would glance at me with a softness that was tinged with worry, a sadness I had never fully understood, now revealed layers I had never imagined. I could see the burden he had carried, the invisible weight of knowledge he had kept locked within himself. His love constrained by the fear of revealing too much too soon. Even the smallest moments, the way he would pause before speaking, the slight furrow of his brow when he thought no one was watching, suddenly felt pregnant with meaning. I could trace his careful attention, his desire to protect me, even when the protection had taken the form of omission, of silence. My mother, too, appeared anew in my memory. The quiet sighs she would let slip when she thought no one was listening, the way she hovered just beyond reach during my early years, the gentle brushes of her hand across my forehead. All of these gestures were not merely habitual care, but acts of love intertwined with fear. She had borne the weight of knowledge silently, carrying it like a fragile flame she dared not extinguish or expose. I could almost feel her heartbeat in those old memories, steady but burdened, each beat echoing with the weight of the secret she had protected. And Amina, my sister, my protector, my constant anchor, rose in my mind as someone even more remarkable than I had realized. She had shielded me from truths I was not yet ready to face, shielding me from knowledge that could have shattered my sense of self in ways I could not have yet understood. Her laughter, her quiet guidance, her patient listening, even her gentle admonishments, they were not simply the acts of a sibling, but the careful movements of someone who understood, on some level, the fragility of my heart and had made it her mission to preserve it. I moved through the days with a strange clarity. I did not feel anger. I did not feel resentment. What I felt was deeper, more nuanced, a profound sadness, a recognition of the sacrifices made in silence, a mourning for the years lived under the weight of omission. I mourned for the invisible burdens my parents had carried alone, for the ways love had been expressed not openly, but through subtle, careful gestures. I mourned for the innocence I had assumed I possessed, only to realize it had been safeguarded, protected, yet also incomplete. And yet beneath that grief, beneath the sense of loss and revelation, there was something else, a quiet, fragile understanding that love, in all its complexity, had always been present. Even the rhythm of the house seemed altered during those days. Each footstep sounded heavier, more deliberate, as if echoing through some invisible water. The squeak of the wooden floors beneath my own feet sounded louder than before, each creak punctuating the stillness in a way that demanded attention. I noticed the faint scratch of the fan blades against the ceiling, the soft thrum of the refrigerator, the occasional drip from a faucet in the distant bathroom. These sounds, once unnoticed, now framed the days like markers in some slow, underwater passage, each note a reminder that I was present, even if only half conscious of the world around me. My own movements felt strange. Cooking breakfast became a deliberate act, each motion weighted with new significance. I noticed the texture of the knife handle as I chopped vegetables, the sound of slices hitting the cutting board, the steam rising from the boiling water curling toward the ceiling. Even the act of stirring rice became a meditation, a rhythm that connected me to the present, while my mind wandered through layers of memory. Folding laundry became an exercise in noticing how soft the fabric felt beneath my fingers, how the folds created gentle valleys and peaks, how even a simple act could carry the weight of centuries of domestic care. And yet, the world remained muted, distant, as though separated from me by a thin but unyielding membrane. Conversations became difficult to follow, words seeming to reach me in fragments. Phone calls sounded flat, the voices on the other end slightly delayed, as if filtered through water. Even laughter, normally a balm, seemed strangely faint, almost alien. The very texture of life felt altered. I was alive, moving, interacting, yet at the same time, detached an observer in a reality I no longer fully inhabited. Memories continued to resurface in waves. I remembered the first time I had noticed the subtle hesitations in my father's words, the careful avoidance in my mother's gaze, the fleeting shadow of uncertainty in relatives' expressions. I remembered small, inexplicable moments from childhood conversations overheard, gestures left incomplete, questions left unasked. Each memory had been stored away, fragmented, waiting for this moment to resurface and take on new meaning. And now, reflecting on them, I could see the web of care and secrecy, the delicate balancing act my family had performed to preserve love while shielding me from truths too heavy for a child. Even mundane moments acquired new significance. When Amina handed me a glass of water, I noticed the way her fingers brushed mine, the gentle pressure of her hand, the quiet reassurance embedded in the simple act. When my mother placed a warm towel on my shoulders, I felt the weight of her love, tempered by years of protective caution. And when my father smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a gesture I had never fully appreciated, I felt the depth of his care, restrained though it was by fear of revelation. In this strange underwater state, the world slowed and expanded simultaneously. Every movement, every glance, every gesture carried weight and significance. I was acutely aware of the passage of time, of the minutes stretching like ribbons, yet each second seemed pregnant with memory, with meaning, with unspoken love. Even silence became a language soft, layered, and heavy with feeling, and through it all, I felt a strange clarity. I understood, in a way I never had before, that love is not always expressed through words or grand gestures. Sometimes, it exists quietly, in subtle movements, in patient waiting, in the protection of innocence. Sometimes, love is the restraint of speech, the choice to shield someone from knowledge until they are ready, the decision to bear burdens alone so that another may grow unscarred. I did not feel bitterness toward my parents for keeping the secret. I did not resent the absence of truth in my earlier years. What I felt was a profound awareness of their love, a mourning for the time spent unaware of it, and an acceptance of the complexity of human care. I understood that life is rarely simple, that love often requires choices that are neither easy nor clear, and that the most profound expressions of devotion can be invisible, unspoken, and carefully hidden in the quiet rhythms of everyday life. I began to notice patterns I had never seen before, the way the sunlight shifted across the floor at different hours, the way the air seemed warmer in certain rooms, the way sounds bounced differently depending on where one stood. These observations, previously trivial, now seemed imbued with significance. Each detail of my environment mirrored the depth of what I was experiencing, subtle, rich with meaning, yet oddly distant, as if observed through the lens of another consciousness. In this suspended state, I began to reflect on myself with the same intensity. I examined my reactions, my emotions, my memories, trying to trace the path of the invisible currents that had shaped me. I saw my own resilience, my capacity for empathy, my ability to love and be loved, all intertwined with the protective network my family had quietly constructed around me. I recognized that even in isolation, even in detachment, I was never truly alone. I had been cradled in love, shaped by care, and preserved in ways I was only now beginning to understand. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, I began to emerge from that underwater state. The walls of the house no longer felt as suffocating, the sounds of life no longer distant echoes. I moved through my daily routines with renewed awareness, noticing the texture of life around me while carrying the understanding of the deep currents beneath it. I realized that I had been living underwater not because the world had changed, but because I had only just begun to see it fully. The days of quiet suspension taught me patience, empathy, and the importance of observation. They taught me that grief and clarity can coexist, that understanding can emerge from silence, and that love is both fragile and resilient. Above all, they showed me that even when life feels muted and slow, every detail, every gesture, every look, every breath is infused with meaning, waiting to be recognized and cherished. And so, gradually, I rose from the weight of that underwater existence, carrying the lessons of those days within me, ready to face the world anew, aware of its beauty, its complexity, and the profound love that had sustained me all along. One evening, I sat with my mother at the small kitchen table. She looked older than I remembered, her hair a little grayer, her hands lined with time, her face carrying an expression of cautious apprehension. I watched her pour tea, her fingers trembling slightly. She was fragile, almost unsure, as if she feared what my knowledge might do to the bond between us. Her voice shook as she said, "Amina told you." I nodded, feeling the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. "I always wanted to tell you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I was terrified that you would stop calling me your mother." My chest tightened. I moved closer, taking her trembling hands in mine. They were smaller than I remembered, lined with the years of worry and fear, yet warm and familiar. "You are my mother," I said softly, my voice catching. "The truth can't change the love you gave me." Her lips quivered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I felt my own eyes sting as I realized the depth of her fear, the years of hesitation, and the courage it had taken to finally let me know. We held each other for a long time, letting silence and understanding fill the space between us. Every tear that fell seemed to release years of tension. Every embrace was a stitch mending the invisible tear that had existed in our relationship. Slowly, the weight in my chest began to lift, replaced by a soft warmth of shared truth and unconditional love. Even after this tender reconciliation, I knew one final step remained. The envelope Amina had given me, the address of my birth mother, sat on my table like a small, heavy stone. Some mornings, I would pick it up, trace its edges with my fingers, and imagine the conversation to come. Other days, I pushed it into a drawer, unable to face the emotions it would unleash. Courage did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, in pieces. Some came from the gentle encouragement of Amina, who reminded me that I had the right to know. Some came from the understanding of my adoptive parents' love, who had given me a life full of care and warmth despite the secret they kept. And some came from within, from a quiet, persistent yearning to understand the entirety of my own story. I spent nights imagining her face, her voice, her hands. I imagined the moment she would see me standing at her door, and I rehearsed every possible reaction, mine and hers. The waiting felt endless, stretching across days that blurred together, filled with anticipation and anxiety, hope and fear. When I finally arrived at her house, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The streets were quiet and still, the soft hum of distant cars and the faint chirping of birds blending into a calm that felt almost sacred. Small trees lined the lanes, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze, and the houses were modest, well kept, their colors soft in the fading afternoon light. There was an understated tranquility here, a sense of ordinary life continuing without awareness of the extraordinary moment about to unfold at the corner house. Her home was tucked into a quiet corner, shielded by a small fence and a garden that seemed to bloom just for her. Flowers of soft pinks, whites, and yellows nodded quietly in the wind, as if greeting me without words, offering welcome through their simple, unassuming presence. The scent of jasmine drifted faintly through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of freshly watered soil, grounding me even as my mind raced. Every step toward her door felt loaded with significance, as though I were moving through decades of hidden history and unspoken longing. I paused at the gate, my heart hammering in my chest, a relentless drumbeat that echoed in my ears. Each step toward the door seemed to stretch infinitely, carrying the weight of emotions I had never allowed myself to fully confront, decades of curiosity, longing, grief, and hope all intertwined. My palms were clammy, my knees felt weak, and yet I kept moving forward, drawn by something stronger than fear, something I could only call destiny. When I lifted my hand to knock, the air seemed to shift. The faint rustle of leaves became louder in my ears. The distant hum of traffic faded, and the world outside that small garden blurred into insignificance. It was as though the house itself held its breath, waiting for the moment that had been anticipated for so long. The door opened before I could even raise my knuckles to knock. She stood there, framed by the soft interior light, and I felt a shock of recognition that was as physical as it was emotional. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, filled immediately with tears. In that instant, I understood that this was the woman whose absence had shaped so much of my life, whose existence had been a quiet undercurrent, felt but never fully known. "It's you," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief and awe. I nodded, unable to find the words to respond. I wanted to speak, to bridge the years of silence with a single declaration. But the weight of all the emotions pressing down on me robbed me of speech. All I could do was stand there, my chest tight, my hands trembling, feeling the tension of decades in a single heartbeat. She reached out with hands that shook slightly, and when her fingers brushed my face, it was as if she needed confirmation that I was real, that I was not a figment of memory or imagination. Her touch was tentative, almost reverent, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Every line of her face, every crease and fold, carried the story of years spent waiting, of longing held silently, of a heart that had been forced to endure absence without surrendering hope. Then, as if the dam that had held back decades of grief and yearning finally gave way, she collapsed into tears. Soft, painful sobs racked her body, a sound so raw and unfiltered that it seemed to echo not just through the small room but through time itself. I felt an ache in my chest, a tightness that made breathing difficult, as though her grief were a tangible weight pressing against me. "I prayed for this day," she said between sobs, her voice breaking in fragments. "I never forgot you, not for a single moment." Her words struck me with an intensity that I had not anticipated. I felt a profound grief for the life she had endured, for the isolation and struggles of her youth, for the love she had carried quietly, desperately, in absence. I could see it in the lines of her face, in the tremor of her hands, in the way her body seemed to collapse under the cumulative weight of years. Her suffering was not dramatic or loud, it was quiet, patient, enduring, and yet it was palpable, pressing against me like a force I could neither ignore nor resist. And yet, alongside that grief, there was another emotion: gratitude. I felt an immense thankfulness for the life I had been given, for the adoptive parents who had raised me with love and patience, for the sister who had been my anchor, and for the hidden threads of care that had sustained me, even when truth had been withheld. I realized, with a clarity that was almost painful, that my life had been shaped by love in ways that were both visible and invisible, tangible and hidden. She continued to weep, and I moved instinctively closer, placing my hands on her shoulders, feeling the quiver of her body beneath my palms, the smell of her perfume soft, floral, familiar in some intangible way mixed with the scent of the garden outside, grounding me as I held her. Her sobs gradually softened into quiet hiccups, and she leaned into me as if seeking both solace and affirmation, needing reassurance that the past had not erased what was now present. "I thought I'd lost you forever," she murmured, her voice barely audible, yet brimming with the weight of unspoken years. "I never stopped hoping, never stopped thinking about you, even when life tried to carry me away from the thought." Her words wrapped around me, tender yet jagged, and I felt a strange, intricate tapestry of emotions unfolding within me: sorrow for her loneliness, awe at the depth of her endurance, relief that she had survived the long years of separation, and a profound sense of belonging, as though some invisible chord had finally been restored. I wanted to speak, to tell her everything I had felt, all the questions I had carried, all the fears I had nursed in silence, but words seemed inadequate, fragile in comparison to the intensity of the moment. Instead, I simply held her, feeling the tremor in her shoulders, the warmth of her presence, the undeniable reality of her love and her loss. Time seemed to stretch, each second infused with meaning, each breath a bridge across decades of absence. And in that space, I understood something fundamental. The truth had finally arrived. Not as a revelation to be processed alone, but as a shared moment, fragile and luminous. We were together now, and that togetherness carried more significance than any words could ever capture. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, her tears subsided into soft, trembling breaths. She lifted her head, her eyes still glistening with moisture, and looked into mine with a mixture of awe, relief, and deep love. "I've waited for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet full of certainty. "I've carried you in my heart all this time." And in that instant, I realized that the weight of absence, of questions unanswered, of years lived apart, could be tempered, not erased, but held differently by the presence of truth, by the reclamation of a bond that had never truly been broken, no matter the distance or the silence. I nodded again, tears brimming in my own eyes, and whispered, "I'm here. I've found you." Her hands cupped my face, and she pressed her forehead to mine. In that touch, I felt the culmination of years, decades of longing, loss, hope, and love. In that quiet, small house, surrounded by modest walls and blooming flowers, we finally bridged the gap that had always existed between us. The world outside continued its ordinary rhythm, yet within that room, something extraordinary had unfolded. The meeting of lives separated but never truly divided, the reunion of hearts, and the first step toward understanding, healing, and belonging. That inside her modest living room, we sat together for hours. She told me everything: the circumstances of her youth, the isolation she had faced, the difficult choices she had to make, the moments she spent wondering about me. She spoke of following my life in small, indirect ways, through relatives, through stories she heard, through bits and pieces that told her I was growing up, safe, and loved. Every word she spoke added texture to the missing parts of my life. Every pause, every tear, every whispered name of mine she had carried silently, spoke of a love that had endured years of separation and pain. I listened, absorbing the mixture of grief, love, and hope. I felt a strange mixture of sadness for her struggles and gratitude for the life she had given me through her decision. I began to understand the full scope of love, the kind that sacrifices itself silently, the kind that endures absence and longing, the kind that never truly leaves. When I finally left her home, I did not feel completely healed. Some pieces of my heart were still jagged, still raw. The ache of decades of mystery and longing had not vanished, but something profound had shifted inside me. I was no longer carrying an empty ache. I had the missing chapter of my story. I had met the woman who had given me life, and in doing so, I had reconciled the duality of my existence: the life I had been given and the life I had been born into. The air outside felt lighter, the world brighter, and my heart carried a quiet strength. I understood, for the first time in a long time, that love was not simple. It was complicated, layered, and sometimes hidden. But it endured in ways I had never truly imagined. As I walked back through the quiet streets toward my home, I thought of everyone who had shaped my life: my adoptive parents, who had loved me unconditionally despite the secret they kept; my sister Amina, whose protection and patience had preserved my innocence while holding the truth; and my birth mother, whose enduring love had never faded. Even in absence, I realized that life, with all its secrets, fears, and burdens, had led me to a deeper understanding of love, family, and self. It was not a perfect story, but it was mine. The hidden pain, the long years of waiting, the moments of doubt and confusion, all had been necessary to bring me to this clarity, this understanding, this peace. For the first time in decades, I felt whole, not because everything was perfect, but because I understood that love, in all its forms, is enough. The gaps, the silences, the secrets, they were part of the beauty of the story, not the flaws. I carried this understanding home, letting the soft evening air wash over me, feeling the quiet heartbeat of life beneath my feet, and the gentle truth within my own heart. For the first time, I was not just moving through life, I was fully present, fully aware, and fully at peace. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't before. Life is not a straight path. It doesn't run smoothly from one point to another, neatly packaged and predictable. It twists, it bends in ways we cannot anticipate. It hides things in shadows, tucked away behind doors we do not yet have the courage or the understanding to open. And then, at moments we often least expect, it reveals them. Not always gently, not always clearly, but it reveals them when we are ready, or when it deems that we must be ready. I remember the day. I learned my family's biggest secret. That day, for a fleeting moment, it broke me. Not in a loud, shattering way, but in a quiet, subtle fracture that reached into every corner of my heart. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, tilting the world and leaving me balancing on uncertainty. The familiar faces of my adoptive parents, the small comforts of my home, the routines I had clung to for so long, all of it suddenly carried a different weight. I remember the colors of that day, the soft golden light filtering through the window, the gentle creak of the wooden floor under my steps, the faint scent of tea brewing in the kitchen. Every small thing seemed to hum with a strange new awareness. I walked through the house and saw it differently. The chair where I had spent countless mornings reading, the table where we had eaten meals together, the garden where I had once played with Amina. Everything was the same, and yet it was entirely different. Yet, as painful as it was, that breaking also rebuilt me, slowly, gently, like a sculptor shaping clay. I began to understand that love is never simple. It is never neat. I learned that love can be complicated, layered, and at times difficult to bear. I learned that silence can come not from cruelty, but from fear, from a desire to protect, from a hope that the truth would not hurt too much. I realized that my parents had carried the weight of this secret for decades, and that their hesitation to tell me was not born of neglect or deception, but of care, of love wrapped in fear. Mothers, I learned, can love in different ways. One gives life. One nurtures it every day with patience, kindness, and unwavering presence. Both forms of love are valid. Both are deep. Both are necessary. And in this understanding, I felt a strange kind of relief settle over me, a warmth that began in the chest and spread outward, softening the edges of my grief. Most of all, I learned that the truth, no matter how painful, sets the heart free. I remember the sensation of that freedom, the lightness that followed the storm of revelation. It was strange how freedom could arrive wrapped in grief, how clarity could coexist with heartbreak. But it did, because truth gives context. It fills the empty spaces we have carried unknowingly for years. It allows us to breathe without the invisible weight pressing against our chest. And it allows us to begin again, fully, as ourselves, unburdened by lies, shadows, or half-dashed truths. Now, I visit my biological mother sometimes. We do not rush. We do not speak in grand declarations. Instead, we sit together quietly. I watch her hands tremble slightly as she pours tea, just as mine once did when I first opened the door of her house. Her eyes search mine with a mixture of awe, relief, and longing, as if trying to memorize every line of my face, every curve, every subtle expression, so that the years apart can be erased, if only in memory. We share small stories. She tells me about her childhood, the struggles she faced as a young woman, the choices she was forced to make, the moments she thought of me, and the dreams she hoped I would live. I tell her about my life with my adoptive family, about Amina, about the quiet love and safety that surrounded me. We laugh sometimes, we cry sometimes, and always, we sip tea together, letting the warmth seep into us, letting the simple act of sitting together fill in spaces that had been empty for decades. I remember the first time I noticed the way her eyes softened when she looked at me. It was subtle, a flicker of tenderness, a catch in her breath, a hand hovering slightly as if she were afraid to touch me too soon. I realized then that absence does not erase love. It does not diminish it. It changes its shape, stretches it across time, but it remains. It is patient. It is enduring. It is steadfast. And I still sit with my adoptive mother. I brush her hair in the evenings, hold her hands when they tremble, listen to her soft sighs, and remind her, gently, that she is, and always will be, my mother. Not the woman who gave birth to me, but the one who nurtured me, loved me unconditionally, and raised me through every storm. Her eyes glisten with tears when I speak these words, and I see in them a quiet relief, a peace she had feared she might never have. I see her shoulders relax, her body shed tension, accumulated over decades, and I feel a quiet joy settle in my chest that I cannot fully describe. To women, one heart. One gave me life, one gave me love, and together, they gave me something even more profound, the knowledge that love is not measured solely by blood, but by the quiet, relentless dedication of the heart. I no longer feel anger. I no longer feel confusion. I no longer carry the ache of unanswered questions, the sting of secrets kept too long. Instead, I feel gratitude, deep, enduring gratitude. Gratitude that the women who gave me life and nurtured it loved me enough to do the impossible. to carry pain silently so I could have a safe, stable, loving home. And in that gratitude, I feel whole. Every morning now, I sit by my window, watching the sunlight fall the same way it did on the day this journey began. The golden light drifts softly over my table, brushing against the pages of books, the corners of the room, the edges of memory. I watch birds flit from tree to tree, the distant hum of life in the streets below, and I breathe in a calmness that once would have felt impossible. I notice the gentle sway of branches in the breeze, the way the sunlight dances on the walls, and the soft murmur of neighbors beginning their day. I watch the world move in its ordinary rhythm, and feel my heart move in harmony with it. But I am different now. I am calmer, stronger, more complete. My heart carries no empty spaces, no unresolved questions gnawing at it. I have seen the depth of love in its many forms, and I have experienced the quiet courage it takes to hold that love, even in secrecy, even in absence. I have learned patience, forgiveness, understanding, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. If there is one lesson I can share from all of this, it is simple yet profound. Family is not built only by blood. It is built by love, by sacrifice, by the choices we make, by the moments that shape us. Sometimes, family is the people who carry us when the world feels too heavy. Sometimes, family is the ones who wait patiently for the truth, even when it takes decades to reveal itself. Sometimes, family is a quiet presence, a guiding hand, a voice of comfort, a shared smile across years of distance. Sometimes the truth hurts, sometimes it heals, sometimes it arrives gently, softly, almost imperceptibly, and sometimes it crashes in like a storm. But it always matters. It always shapes us. It always brings us closer to who we really are. And for that, for the lessons, for the love, and for the quiet courage of the women who gave me my life and my heart, I am grateful. I am grateful not just for the answers, but for the journey itself, for the waiting, the questions, the heartbreak, and the revelations. I am grateful for the women who carried me in different ways. I am grateful for the understanding that even when life's paths twist unexpectedly, we can find beauty, clarity, and love at the end of the journey. I am whole, and I am at peace.